The title is the actual ownership, like, you know, the philosophical thing, right? But it's not tangible. The tangible thing that's actually transferred is called a contract. Everyone agree? We did this. Remember that long contract of sale with all those various terms? So if you want to sell a easement, you use a contract. Now, Simone said something interesting. I think she jumped a couple steps ahead, which was good. I said the privity of estate. That was the question. She said there's contract, right? So Walker, is there privity of estate here?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you say yes?
My intuition tells me that because B sold an easement to A, and I guess they're probably adjoining parcels since B or A has to use an easement to get onto these properties, that they have a horizontal privity of the estate or whatever.
Okay. What do you think?
Yes, as well. But is it because A received it directly from B, and not from a third party or from someone?
Okay, now you're actually on the right track.
I put true as well because it's successive from A to B, and also it's, you know, they both currently have property rights.
Oh, okay. Anyone for false? Yeah, right there, back there. Jillian, yeah.
I put false because since A sold it to B, they don't have the same right. They don't have the same rights to that property.
You're getting really close. Anna? You put false? Or either one? Either one, whoever one.
I said false because an easement only gives you the right to use the land, and the B does like to see in owning it.
No.
Common law is between a landlord and a tenant, correct?
That's in England, but I'm talking about the United States. You're actually on the right track.
Does it matter that it seems like it's attached to A rather than to his property?
You're getting you're close. You're getting really close. Robert?
Privity of estate, doesn't that mean that it's the same land? So it has to be between a landlord and a tenant? Like,
Well, that's what he said. That's the English rule. I'm asking about American common law. Kaylee?
Is it because it's privity of contract rather than privity of
Oh, she got it. What's the difference between privity of contract and privity of estate?
Well, privity of estate would be if A owned Blackacre and conveyed it to be
Exactly. Say it again. Say everyone heard it, please. You're exactly right.
So privity of estate would be like among successive owners of the same tract of land.
Very good. All right. Very good. Thank you. I'll repeat it. So there are two terms, and Simone said it, and I thought she was going there, but it took an extra minute. There's privity of estate and there's privity of contract, right? These are two separate concepts that you're going to have to be familiar with. Privity of contract is exactly what you'll learn about in torts or in contracts, right? If I sell you a car, if I sell you a widget, right? You and I have a contractual relationship. And if that car is defective, whatever, you can sue me. No questions about it. Can you sue the manufacturer? Different question. So here we have an easement being sold from A to B. Actually, from B to A. There's privity of contract between the two of them. And if that easement is violated, right? If that easement is violated, A can sue B, or B can sue A. But be very careful. What are they suing over? They're suing over the contract, right? They're both parties to the contract, and if there's a breach, A can sue B, or B can sue A. That's privity of contract, and that's nothing new. You guys learned that in torts, learned that in contracts, we did that early this semester. The common law concept of privity of estate is different. Privity of estate is not merely A suing to B or B selling to A. It involves the sale of land. And actually, Kaylee said exactly right. You can't just give someone an easement under the common law and have privity of estate. At the common law, this transaction was fine. There's no problem with this transaction between A and B. But you do not get to privity of estate unless the easement comes along with the land. So let me reframe this question. This is Kaylee's hypothetical, right? A owns Blackacre and Whiteacre. Okay? Actually it should be, okay? A sells Whiteacre to B and reserves an easement for the benefit of the owner of Blackacre. Okay, everyone see the example I gave right there. A owns Blackacre and Whiteacre. A sells Whiteacre to B and reserves an easement for the benefit of the owner of Blackacre. Everyone see the difference between the two questions, right? Here, they're not only transferring easement in isolation. They're transferring the easement along with a conveyance of land. Okay? Here, there's privity of contract and privity of estate. You got both of them. You have both privity of contract and privity of estate. Everyone see why? There's always been privity of contract, that's fine. But in order for this to work, you also need privity of estate. And it really matters for covenants, our topic for our next class. So with this regime, when it's an easement along with the conveyance of the land, whether it's a subdivision or whatever else, then you get to the privity of estate. And that's the important lesson for today. Questions on this? Yeah.
Can you have privity of estate without privity of contract? Like privity of contract?
Yeah, no, you can't. If you have privity of estate, there will necessarily be privity of contract. But you can have privity of contract without privity of estate. The first example I gave, and went around the room on that, there was privity of contract, but no privity of estate. Here, this one you got both of them. Everyone see why you have both of them? When the land is conveyed along with the easement in one single transaction, that's how you get it. Right? This was at common law the way you had to do things. You couldn't just give someone an easement or a covenant in the abstract. You had to give them a piece of land with a covenant attached to it in order to achieve privity of estate. Now, the modern approach, right, the third restatement gets rid of all this. They don't care about any of this. But you have to learn it. Why? Because states like Texas still follow these sorts of rules. Okay? You need to know about how these burdens run in certain circumstances.
You said at the same time, so if they conveys an easement to B and then later sells the land, they don't have privity of estate for that easement.
I missed you in the middle. Say it one more time, please.
You said the sale of land and easement has to be conveyed at the same time.
Yes.
So you can't convey the easement and later sell the land to that same person.
Well, you can't disentangle the two. The easement or the covenant is going to be stuck to the land. You can't separate them. So whenever the land is sold, it necessarily carries the easement with it.
Okay, so that's the same situation.
Right. Once an easement once a covenant is attached to the land properly, you can't get rid of it. It's there forever. So every successive conveyance has the covenant with it. Does that make sense? I saw another hand somewhere. Right. I want you all to understand this because the next topic about the benefits, the burdens, if you get this foundational concept, that's going to be easy, right? I'm sure you're doing the reading, you're looking at this chart, it's A, B, C, D, you're probably confused, have your minds? Mm-hmm. That's right, every year, same thing, right? But if you get this first question about whether there's privity of estate, it gets a lot simpler.
So if there's no...
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. There, okay, now I'll come. Yes, Bradley.
If there's no sale of land, then there can't be any kind of privity of estate. Right.
Say that question again, please.
If there's no dispatch of land,
right?
There can't ever be a privity of estate.
At common law, that's correct. The modern approach, different deal, right? But at common law, unless you have a conveyance of land or subdivision or something, you can't attach a covenant to it, right? But again, you can still make this transaction, right? The first question I made. There's nothing wrong with this transaction, but they can only sue on the contract. It can't bind successors, right? You cannot bind the successors. The reason why this second question is so much more powerful is it works to bind successors, that you have this privity of estate, which can bind future parties. You just want, like in England, I think a couple people said England, right? In England, you can't bind successors. When you give an easement or a covenant, it's basically between A and B. That's all it is. And person C comes along will not be subject to it. in the United States, we allow covenants to be binding on future parties. And that's why you have to follow these rules, at least under the common law. That's why I framed the question very carefully at common law. I was deliberate on that front. David?
If an easement, also if it arose by necessity, and then the person who got it by necessity conveys.
Easements by necessity aren't subject to these usual rules. I'm going to punt on your question now, but they're not subject to these rules. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Assigning the easement by necessity is difficult because they're created by a court, and there is no privity, right? So it's a different deal. So I don't want to squeeze it here. Yes, sir, Chester.
So when you say for common law, you cannot bind future parties. No, you cannot bind future parties only between the two parties in the contract.
With the common law, unless you have privity of estate, you cannot bind future parties. That make sense? You can only bind future parties at common law if you have privity of estate. That's the rule, right? Which is why this question, which we're saying 15 minutes on, is important. Because if you don't get this, the rest of the class won't make sense. Okay, questions on this? All right, let's move on a little bit. So one of the first questions a student asks me is, Josh, what's the difference between a covenant and an easement, right? I'm sure some of you are wondering that now. And Josh, what's the difference between a covenant and an equitable servitude? Not much, right? A lot of what you can do with a covenant, you can do with an easement. A lot of what you can accomplish with an equitable servitude, you can do with an easement or a covenant. They're, in many respects, interchangeable. So here's the way I give it to you to make your lives easier. And please listen to me on this one. For the exam, right? If I say something is an easement, trust me, it's an easement. I want you to apply the rules of easements. I want you to give me the cases about easements. If I tell you this is a covenant, trust me, it's a covenant. I'm not tricking you. Give me the rules of covenants. If I give you a question that says this is an equitable servitude, trust me, give me the rules for equitable servitudes. Okay? I'll explain the difference between the two of them, but these are not bright lines, they're fuzzy. And very often, an equitable servitude and a covenant may look identical. And maybe they differ in one respect or another. And sometimes an easement and a covenant can be basically identical, and they look a little bit different. But generally, right, generally I can give you a gross overview. Easements are designed to allow a person to do something, right? I'm allowed to cross over Blackacre. I'm allowed to go get water at a lake, right? Easements allow someone to do something. A covenant is negative. It says, don't do this, right? Don't build a factory. Don't build commercial facilities. Don't dump waste in the river. So generally, and this is not 100%, so don't take me at that, but generally, an easement is, can I do something? Can I trespass in your land? A covenant is, hey, you don't do that, right? Don't do that. Because the covenants are generally restrictive, they're negative, it's important that they are binding not only on A and B, but future parties. So if you sell a piece of land with a covenant on it, it says, I am giving you this land because I don't want any commercial residences here, or commercial businesses here. You want to sell your own property, and the person you sell to will have the same benefit, right? You want that benefit to flow to everyone down the line. So easements generally don't get you there. They can, but the better approach is a covenant, because a covenant is restricting the use of land for the present and the future and infinity and beyond, right? Equitable servitude, the other one, is a very tricky thing to define, because generally with an equitable servitude, it's not written down, right? It's done in equity, right? The courts are enforcing it as an equitable manner. But unfortunately, that's not a bright line rule. As you see in the Neponsit case, it was written down. It was enforced as an equitable servitude. So I can tell you in most cases, equitable servitudes are not written, but they can be written, and they can still be enforced as such. The rules for an equitable servitude and a covenant are very similar. In fact, in most cases, they're probably identical. So this is my way of telling you, I don't want you to kill yourselves trying to figure out which is which is which. It's an unfair question and doesn't get you anything. So just listen to me, trust me when I say it is what it is, and give the rules for that. Understood? I promise you in the exam, at least 10 of you will give me the rules for a covenant when analyzing easement, without fail. I'm saying this now, at least 10 of you will. Happens every semester, and you'll lose lots of points. Don't do it. Just don't do it. I'm telling you, I want all of you to do well. I don't want you to make easy, stupid mistakes. You can screw up in the hard stuff, but not the easy stuff, right? Okay, so everyone with me so far? All right, let's go to this diagram, which will be on. I can stop this now. See, yeah, not so good in that one. It was false. Yeah, okay, well, now you know. Okay. This diagram has been drawn on blackboards now, I guess, projector screens for 100 years. And it's given rise to these two concepts: horizontal privity and vertical privity. Now, these phrases, horizontal privity and vertical privity, are made up. They're not real, right? There's no actual statute, right? There's no case law that says horizontal and vertical privity. But so many law professors and students have used this exact same diagram that now that's basically become what it's known as. This diagram is used to explain how the benefits and the burdens run with respect to covenants. All right? So I want to walk through this diagram step by step. Okay? We'll walk through it very carefully. So initially you have A and you have B. A owns Whiteacre, B owns Blackacre. Okay? One of these will be benefited, one of them will be burdened. So let's make the example. A will be the one that's benefited. It's dominant. Remember that? A is going to be dominant. And then B is, what's your name tag right there? What's your name? Yeah. Did I skip you already? Did I call you already? No. Okay. John Paul. What do we call, if A is the dominant side, what do we call B? Servitude. Very good. So A is dominant and B is servitude. And why? Okay, I'll use the example it gives in the book. Makes it easy. The covenant says that B will not build a factory. B will not have industrial stuff. Okay? So again, this makes sense as a covenant because it's not allowing A to trespass. It's saying B will not do something. B will not build a factory on its land. Okay, now, so Robert, let's use this example. A owns Whiteacre, B owns Blackacre, right? B and A enter an agreement, and they strike up a covenant, and B promises, I will not build a factory, and in exchange, A gives him some money. Okay. Is that a valid transaction? Is that transaction valid? That's all that happened. A owns Whiteacre, B owns Blackacre. A gives some money to B, and then B promises not to build a factory. Is that transaction valid?
It's not written down or anything?
It's written down. They're written down.
I feel like it's valid.
Okay, it's valid. I would agree with him. Okay. He's right. That's a valid transaction. It's written down. It satisfies the statute of frauds. They have a contract, right? So what happens then if B goes ahead and builds a factory? What can they do?
I want to say injunction.
Yeah. Well, he can sue for injunction or damages. Yeah, because he actually has a he has a written contract. He sued for breach. Right? This is actually Boomer, right? It's, whether it's injunction or damages, he can sue. That's fine. Okay? That's easy. No doubts about that. Okay? But what happens, let's say you're next, right? Okay. B sells Blackacre to C. Okay? And exactly as I said, C builds a factory. Can A, this is the diagonal, right? Can A then sue C?
No,
Why not?
because they don't have the required privity.
Privity of?
Oh, my goodness.
What's the phrase? Give me the phrase. You're right. They cannot sue. But what's lacking? What kind of privity is lacking?
Privity of contract. This state.
What was the arrangement? I think Robert said it ago between A and B. What did they have in do that?
They had a covenant.
Well, they had a covenant, but what was the document? That's how you remember this.
Oh, it was a contract.
They had a contract. That's how you remember this, right? A and B had a contract. So A and B are in privy of contract. So who's bound by that contract?
B and A are both.
That's all they're bound. Is C bound by that contract?
No.
No, they're not. So can A sue C on the contract?
No.
Exactly. Everyone understand that? The contract has two parties, A and B. A can sue B, B can sue A, that's fine, no problem. But once C comes into the picture, right? C is not a party to that contract, therefore, C cannot be sued, right? If you're not a party to a contract, you're not bound by it. That's black letter law, simple. So as we finish up, really close, there was privy of contract here, but is there any privy of estate on the diagonal?
No.
Okay, good. There's no privy of estate, and why?
Because they didn't have privy contract. Because he didn't enter into.
You're good. I'll move to Virginia. Virginia. How would privy of you did good. You did good. All right. Virginia. How would privy of estate be present here? What would have to happen?
When he gave him the land, he'd also have to give him a covenant.
Yes. Well, give
or
her. Oh.
easement, or whatever.
How? I thought you had and you lost. I'm sorry. I celebrate too. I spiked a couple too early. How would A and B have had privy of estate? What would have had to happen?
There has to be the land and the easement.
Yes. What do you mean the land? Give me
The land,
In order to put a covenant on Blackacre, what would have to happen? Let's be precise. To put a covenant on Blackacre, what would have to happen?
well, there would have to be an agreement between the two, like
Well, not just an agreement. What would have to happen to put a covenant on Blackacre?
in exchange, like you would give him money and you would tell him I'm not gonna do it, or I'm not gonna build the property.
Money's not enough, Justin.
A would have had to sell the land
Yes.
with the covenant.
To have privity of estate, there needs to be a conveyance of land. Write that in big, bold letters, right? To have privity of estate, there needs to be a conveyance of land. Specifically, A would have to sell Blackacre to B with the covenant on it. Say it again. A would have to sell Blackacre with the covenant on it. So this example, right? This example, it's not enough just for A to give some money. A would actually have to give Blackacre with the covenant on it. In other words, at common law, you cannot sell a covenant in isolation on privity of estate. To transfer a covenant, you need to have it attached to a piece of land. So what happens if B owned Blackacre, right? What would they have to do? Elena, let's say B actually owned Blackacre. How then you put a covenant on it? It's actually a lot of work, a lot of work. But how would you put a covenant on Blackacre if you already owned it? What would you have to do?
You would have to have another transaction for the land.
Yeah, describe it for me, please. You're right.
You would have to, wouldn't you have to have another transaction with A, like sell the land back,
Yeah.
and then have the
Yeah, so follow me here, right? You're exactly right. B would have to sell Blackacre to A, and A would sell it right back to Blackacre with a covenant on it. Everyone see that? You understand what I just said, right? At common law, to put a covenant on a land that's binding, you need to do this little dance. B would sell Blackacre to A, and A would sell it right back to B with a covenant attached to it. If you didn't do it, you do not have privity of estate, and it's not binding. Yusuf and then Justin.
I was just gonna say, wouldn't issues arise where
Oh,
it's
they
up
would.
to one party?
That's why the modern approach is more or less rejected this, right? Justin.
Well, I was gonna say, would the court recognize like a nominal sale? If they're like, hey, I'll sell it to you for $1, you sell it back to me for
Yeah,
$1.
that's fine, but there has to be that extra transaction. Huh?
Could B sell the land to C with covenant attached to it, and then?
But how would A be bound by that then? So the trick is to to get privy of estate, you need to have the burden and the benefited party in the same transaction, right? The burden party is B, the benefited party is A. Both of them have to be part of that transaction. If B sells it to C with a covenant, A's not party to that, he's not bound by it, right? But once you have the sale from A to B of Blackacre with the covenant, then it's binding. Then you have horizontal privity. And when you have horizontal privity, the burden runs down, right? This is the rule. The reason why we need this horizontal privity, this silly transaction, is the burden can run down. Okay? At common law, unless you have this horizontal privity, this additional sale of land, there's no privity of estate. In order for the burden to run, you need privity of estate, you need horizontal privity. Everyone understand that? Unless an extra transaction is made, C will not be bound. C can build a factory however he wants. But in order for C to be restricted, you need this additional land sale initially. Yes?
In common law, that sale had to be in fee simple?
We'll get to the transaction between B and C in a minute. Right? We didn't do that yet. I'm talking about A and B. We'll get to that other transaction in a minute. Oh, you're saying between A and B, is that fee simple?
I mean, to protect B, you might not want to convey all of it. You might want to just convey.
It does not have to be fee simple. It does not.
Like he could protect himself by not conveying.
Yeah, it wouldn't make much sense to put in a covenant on a life estate, but I suppose you could. I suppose another question. So I want to understand that, right? In order for C to be burdened by this, at a minimum, you need this horizontal privity, this privy of estate, or A sells Blackacre to B. There's one other thing here. Last one.
So A would have to sell it to B.
With the covenant on it. Right? A sells Blackacre to B with the covenant attached to it in one single transaction. That gives you horizontal privity. It gives you privity of estate. And because that, the burden can flow down.
And so if A didn't sell it with the covenant on it, he would have to sell it back to A.
And do that all over again.
So, and that would be the extra transaction.
Bingo.
And there's no way you could just write into a contract that we're selling this covenant and
That's
it's
the
going to
magic
be
word
binding
though.
on
You said
successive
contract.
purchases.
You have privity of contract, so it's valid, but only between A and B, not
So
C.
you can't include that in the contract that it's like
Nope.
binding on. Okay.
Well, you have to actually make the land sale. That was the common law rule. Yeah.
You said this is still practiced in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, generally the way you get around this is by subdivision, right? If you want to impose restrictions on various pieces of land, you do it with a subdivision. That's where you put the covenants in. But just reaching a covenant between two landowners is not always the most efficient way of doing it. This is why you often see in Houston, if you drive around, like signs say deed restricted communities, you've seen these, right? What that generally means is when the land was first chopped up, people put covenants all over the place. And that way you have a single owner at the outset who then spreads it out, and that's fine. But it's problematic because a lot of jurisdictions have not adopted this modern approach to the burden. Yeah, Bradley.
To have vertical privity.
Well, we didn't get there yet.
But
We didn't get there. I'm deliberately not doing this. We'll get there in a minute. I want you to get horizontal first. I promise. I promise I'll get there. I'm 100%. Okay? So everyone get the idea of privity of estate and horizontal privity. Okay? So a common law, again, for the burdens to run, you need horizontal privity. But the rule is different for benefits. And this is where students always fall off, right? Right? I think, okay, so next question. Okay, let's go back to our first example. A and B enter into a simple transaction, right? A gives B money, B gives A a covenant. There's no sale of land, okay? So now, A sells it to D, okay? A sells to D. B builds a factory. We already agree there's no horizontal privity, there's no privity of estate. Can D sue B? Can D sue B?
I would say no, unless we pay that money in some way, unless there was that.
What's the rule for benefits running in common law? Do you need horizontal privity for benefits to run a common law? Do you need horizontal privity for benefits? No, why not?
Because it stays with the person, not the.
Yeah. So this is a rule that always trips students up. In order for the burden to run, you need horizontal privity. But for the benefit to run, you don't. So who's benefiting here? Who's dominant? A and then D. Because D is benefiting by it, D can sue directly to B, even in the absence of horizontal privity. Right? That's the tricky one. Right? For the burden to run, you need horizontal privity. On this side, the burden to run on this side, you need horizontal privity. But for the benefit to run on this side, you don't need horizontal privity. I know, it's maddening, right? And the reason why is, it's much more difficult for someone to be burdened. And the court imposes more requirements for the burden to continue. But for someone to benefit, it's not that big of a deal. The requirements are lesser than the benefit to run. Okay? Yusuf?
You're benefiting by.
Because you don't have a factory next door, right? That's your benefit. You don't have a factory next door. Make sense?
And you're the party that split the covenant or wanted to.
Yes, you're the dominant side. You're the dominant side. You're the dominant estate. Right? So again, for the burden to run, you need this horizontal privity, this privity of the state. For the benefit to run, you do not. That's right.
But you can cancel that covenant orally or by just waiting or whatever.
Are you saying if D and B come to an arrangement?
He doesn't care about the gas station, whatever he's doing.
Yeah, if D chooses not to enforce it, then he can just let it go. But if he wants to sue, he can. Right?
So you just look at it as the dominant estate doesn't need horizontal privity, but a serving estate does need horizontal privity.
Yes. Yes. I wouldn't summarize it that concisely, but that's a good summary. The way I would describe it is the side that benefits does not need horizontal privity, and the side that burdens does require the burden to run. Yes, sir.
In the transfer of land, if B sold to C, would B have to tell C that there's a covenant on the land?
I'm not onto that one yet. I'm going to do vertical later, I promise. I'm doing this very deliberately for a reason. I want to finish horizontal, but you're asking about vertical. We'll get there in a minute, okay? I promise. Bradley was jumping on that a minute ago. Let's see.
When would the dominant estate not be the one benefiting? Isn't that the...
There might be reciprocal easements where reciprocal covenants where both the benefit and both the burden. So labeling it that concisely may actually lead you astray. Okay. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. A reciprocal covenant is where it's like, okay, you don't build a factory and I don't build apartment buildings, right? They both burden each other. So if you do dominant serving, you may confuse yourself a bit, but it's not wrong. Okay, come with me so far. Let's go to the most messed up one, right? Again, A gives B money, B gives A the covenant. A sells to D, B sells to C. All right, Lindsay, my all-star student who comes on Sundays. It's true. C builds a factory. Can D sue C? That is, C builds a factory. Can D then go after C?
Isn't there no horizontal privity between A and B?
Exactly right.
No?
Because there's no horizontal privity, D cannot sue B. I'm sorry, D cannot sue C. Right? Again, it's the same issue. The burden doesn't flow down because there's not horizontal privity. In order for the burden side to be brought to court, there must be horizontal privity, there must be privity of the state. You need to actually transfer the land with the covenant attached to it. You cannot transfer the land, you cannot transfer the covenant in isolation, right? So the way I'll test you on this, and I'm not making any secret about it, is I'll have a situation where covenant's transferred in the abstract, saying, hey, I'll give you $1,000 if you give me a covenant. Oh, deal. You need to know that that's not going to be binding on successors because there's no horizontal privity, there's no privity of the state. Understood? Right? That's what you need to realize. If they don't have the transaction with the covenant on the land sale, there's no privity of the state, there's no horizontal privity, and then C will never be bound. That's your answer. And if you need to draw this picture on your blue book, do it. Draw it on your notes, that's fine. Have it in your notes ready for you, right? I may not make it A, B, C, D, their names might be differently, fine. Put whatever names you got there, but draw it out. Because I promise you, if you don't visualize this, you'll probably screw it up, and there's no reason to. So that's horizontal privity. I want to understand that. I'll get to vertical in like 30 seconds. Any questions on horizontal privity? Okay. What am I with that? Oh, yes.
So D can sue C, but D can sue D.
Yes. Yes.
Can you go over?
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate the hand raising. Yeah. So ask your question again, Jesse.
We're just clarifying. So D can't sue C, but D can sue D.
Right. The reason why is because B is still bound by the original contract, and the benefit flows down. Right. B is always going to be bound by the contract, and the benefit does not require horizontal privity. The person that's benefited does not require horizontal privity. However, he cannot sue C. D cannot sue C because C is not bound with the absence of horizontal privity. B can always be sued. He's bound by the contract and the benefit flows down. But once you go down here, unless it's horizontal privity, C cannot be sued. Understood? Bradley, is that good? Is Rita, yeah, that make sense? Ask your question out loud so if you ever get other people having the same question.
Just reiterate it.
Good. Okay. Everyone get this. Go back in your notes, it's recording, watch this 30-minute segment again, but make sure you can walk through the simple diagram. You'll be spending overtime on cases today, I bet, right? Not the stupid picture. We didn't do vertical privity. Now let's do vertical privity, right? I deliberately put it off because vertical privity is a lot easier and a lot simpler to understand. Vertical privity, which basically means from A to D or from B to C, means that the benefit or burden runs when the full estate is being transferred. Okay? The entire estate must transfer. Right? So if A has fee simple, in order for the benefit to run, he must give fee simple to D. If B has fee simple, in order for the burden to run, he must give fee simple to C. Say if A is a fee simple owner and he only gives a leasehold, right, for a year, the benefit doesn't run. If he gives a life estate, it doesn't run. And the reason why makes sense. If, say, D is only a life estate holder, A is still around, or his remaindermen are around, to enforce it if need be. Right? Someone with a greater interest can then enforce the benefit. So the person who can enforce it is one with a superior interest. So unless the entire estate is transferred, fee simple, whatever it happens to be, the benefit does not run. If you have an adverse possessor, for example, right? They're not acquiring the same interest. They're actually acquiring a new title. Benefit doesn't run. You need vertical privity always. So even if you have horizontal privity, right, you also need to look for vertical privity. Okay? Now we know on the left side, horizontal privity is not required, but you always need vertical privity. For the benefit to run, you always need vertical privity. For the benefit to run, you always need vertical privity. For the burden, you need both. For the burden to run, you need horizontal and vertical privity. You need both of them. For the benefit, you only need vertical. For the burden, you need vertical and horizontal. You gotta have both of them. Okay, John, you were patiently waiting. Good. I knew I was going to cut you off and get you there. Good, thank you.
Like, are we still in common law only?
I'm only in common law. Didn't get to modern yet. We'll get there later. And in case you haven't noticed, I usually test common law rules because they actually matter. The modern approach, nothing matters, right? It's whatever. So more often than not, I'll test from common law because there's actually rules to apply.
What do you mean it doesn't matter?
Because the modern approach dismisses the need for horizontal privity. Right?
Is that what we're going to be applying in real life?
Yeah. Well, you'll be doing both depending where you are. So you need to have both rules. But what I mean by that is the modern approach is far less rigorous. It basically waives all the requirements. Oh, this is old stuff, silly stuff, right? You still need to know the common law rules are applied. And that's usually what I test on for that reason. Okay? All right, let's go page 894. There's an example. Yeah, it's in the, it's not like labeled well. Okay, here. All right, so let's walk through this. Yes, Kelly.
I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
It's about horizontal probate, and we've got into vertical, but, so for horizontal probate, could the parties, other than, I guess, conveying, the property with the covenant on it, could they also make like a straw man?
Yes.
purchase? Okay.
Yes. So tell us what a straw purchase is.
Basically, they could just sell it to like a third party, and
Right.
then the third party sell it back.
Right. So let's use this example, right? A owns Whiteacre, B owns Blackacre. They could do a straw purchase, right? Where B sells Blackacre to a third party, maybe a secretary or something, right? Then B sells it, the secretary sells it to A, and A sells it right back with the covenant attached to it. So you can have a third party involved. That's doable. Bradley?
Why would you do that?
Perhaps B doesn't really trust A, and they want someone else involved with it, right? There might be a fear that if B sells it straight away to A, he just walks away. So if there's a third party that can put the covenant on it, it might be a little bit better. Yeah.
Could you contract in with that?
You could, and you could say, if you don't convey this back to me, I'll sue you for breach, right? But, you know.
It's a different way of doing things.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but you can use a straw. Let's do this example. Who am I up to? Megan, you want to read for us this paragraph? Begin, suppose that B. Okay.
Okay. Suppose that B, owner of Blackacre, has promised A, owner of Whiteacre, that Blackacre shall not be used for industrial purposes. B sells Blackacre to C, and A sells Whiteacre to D. C constructs a factory on Blackacre. D sues C for damages. Will the covenant run to C and D?
Okay, so let's try it. In this question, exactly as the question is framed, does the burden run to D? Exactly as this question is framed.
No,
Why not?
because there's no, horizontal.
Why isn't a horizontal privity?
Because they didn't sell the land.
Very good. Everyone see that, right? In this example, there's no horizontal privity because there's no sale of land. Therefore, the burden doesn't run. Now, what about C, Megan? Finish it up. Does C benefit from this transaction?
Yes,
How come?
because you only need vertical privity.
That's right. For the benefit to run, all you need is vertical privity. Here, the entire estate is transferred. C benefits from this transaction. Okay? So the lawsuit against C would fail. The lawsuit against D would fail. Even though C has the benefit, C cannot sue D. And this is precisely the diagram we have here. I mean, it's the same exact thing, but written in the form of a question that you may see on a test. Okay? Okay. That's a common law approach. The restatement third approach, which only a handful of states have adopted, rejects that. They just throw out horizontal privity. All you need is vertical privity. Right? So you need to know both. But I can explain to you the third restatement approach in 30 seconds. Right? The common law approach took me about 45 minutes to explain. But you need to know both of them. All right. So any questions on that? Okay.
What did you say the modern,
The modern approach
Yeah.
discards horizontal privity.
Okay.
And if you actually read the restatement third, which again virtually no states have adopted, they actually get rid of vertical privity also. They have some weird distinction which I don't even want to bother going into. But under the modern approach, if the parties intend for a covenant to bind people, it binds them. Right? That's the The general rule of modern property law, which most states haven't adopted, is we follow the intent of the parties, rules be damned. Which is why I'm never going to test you on that, because it's so easy to apply. Right? Oh, what did the parties intend? That's it. But generally speaking, the modern approach is horizontal privity is not required. Yeah, that's the important point to know. Yes?
So in the last example, if B made the promise to A about not building the industrial or using it for industrial purposes, but B retained it, and then A sold to D, B would still be bound to D?
Yes.
Okay.
D could sue A. I'm sorry. D could sue B. That's not a problem, right? Go to our diagram. You can go like this. D can sue B, right? But you can't do this. You can't go D to C, and also you can't go A to C. You can only do this. Make sense? Actually, I never use a stupid laser pointer, right? Ah, there we go. So right, better than my finger. If you have D, D cannot sue C. D can sue B, but A cannot sue C.
If D didn't receive a fee simple, like a fee simple subject to that
Yeah,
judgment or something.
yeah. If it's a lesser estate, there's no vertical privity. That's always there. That's the easy part to get. The horizontal privity is a lot tougher. Never actually used this for real. It's here. Everyone with me.
When it comes to the benefit and the burden, can we go over like C's doesn't get burdened by anything,
C is absolutely burdened. You can't build a factory.
but D can't sue for that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. So because the burden doesn't run to C, C can do whatever he wants.
Right.
Exactly.
But he's still kind of
No, C is free and clear, right? Unless A and B did it right, C doesn't have any problem. Right. A is to blame. If he wanted this covenant to be binding in the future, he should have done it the right way. He didn't. So A is unable to sue C. Lindsay.
What about if A and B are both burden and benefit? Like they both promise to not.
Right, that's Jesse asked that. There's reciprocal
Okay.
covenants. Right, that's fine. Those are called reciprocal covenants, and those are fine. You can have those, but you still need the transaction of land, right? What would actually have to happen is what you would probably do is they would sell, A and B would sell land and wire to a straw, and a straw would sell right back to them with the covenants on them, right? You would need to have additional sales and transactions to do that. You can do that. That's not a problem, right? A promises not to build a factory, and B promises not to build a factory. They're both benefiting and they're both burdening. It's what's called a reciprocal covenant. How are we doing? Make sense? Chester.
So when a reciprocal covenant is created, you essentially have a square.
Stop making this more complicated. Yes. Yeah. Basically, oh God. Basically, white acre is both benefiting and burdening, and black acre is both benefiting and burdening. So yeah, everything's going every which way. But yes, which is why I didn't ask about that, but so I will.
Is that something we're covering in this class, or?
I don't think I've ever tested on that, so no. I mean, you can look at my exams. It gets really complicated, so I think I'll probably pass that one. If you get this much, I'm happy. This is one of the harder concepts in this class. It's always property too. If you get this, the rest of the week's fine for the rest of this unit. Actually, it's Thursday. You're done after this, but you know the rest of the. I think there are 3 or 4 classes in Covenant. It gets easier. All right, everyone with me. So the first case. We haven't even done the case. We're an hour in. Told you spend an hour in this diagram. So the first case, Tulk versus Moxhay. I know students love when they get a case from England. It's like, why do we need to know this crap? Well, it's it is relevant because this introduces the concept of an equitable servitude, right? And the fact that it says equity tells you that it's not a covenant at law, right? In the United States, we have what are called real covenants at law. in the UK, in England, there were no real covenants at law enforceable. So instead they described it as one of equity and equitable servitude. So, who am I up to? Anthony, just give us the facts, please. It's a pretty short case. I'm sure you love reading it.
Yeah.
So what are the facts here in Tulk versus Moxhay?
The original owner of all these properties around the square sold the square to the defendant, or the defendant's predecessor, and wanted the square to only be used as a park and a park only.
Okay, good. Now, did the original owner try to bind successors and try to bind future owners of the property?
Well,
did he try to?
He not in his lifetime, I don't think.
But did the instrument at issue try to bind successors? Yes. Okay, good. Was that permissible under British law?
No.
What did the court do anyway?
They basically enjoined him through equity.
Yeah. So here, damages were not appropriate, right? When you're talking about equity, the remedy for a violation of an equitable servitude is an injunction, right? When you have a covenant that's actually written down, you can see damages. But generally, when you have an equitable servitude, the remedy is injunction. Again, the Neponsit case throws that out the window, so I don't want to make this a hard and fast rule. But generally, when you have an equitable servitude, the remedy is injunctive relief. You can say, stop building, keep this as a park. And what you have to understand about this case is the judge basically said, well, under the laws of England, we can enforce this covenant, but it would not be equitable to enforce it. I'm sorry, it would be inequitable not to enforce it. That is, you took this land with notice that the restriction was on it, you knew what you're getting into, we're going to make you stick by it, so that they can actually issue an injunction. Okay? One other note, England had no recording system like we have here in the United States. So it was basically virtually impossible for someone to know if their predecessor was bound. So the fact that here there was actual notice, the guy bought it knowing that this restriction was on it, I think is why he lost. Again, what's my rule? I think I said last week, or the week before. If you take property and you know there's a restriction on it and you break it anyway, you're probably going to lose. Right? Even if the law's against you, courts tend to rule that way. So here, because there was notice, even though the real covenants at law were not enforceable, they enforce as a matter of equity. Okay? That's all I want to say about that case. Are there any questions? You're not going to see equitable servitudes too often, although it comes up in the Neponsit case. More often than not, these things are written down, but you may come across this once in a while. So, any questions on the Tulk v. Moxhay case? Short, sweet, not that important. Okay. All right. So this is the next case: Sanborn versus McLean. This is a case where someone tried to build a gas station in their backyard, right? You might be thinking, "Oh my God, who would want to build a gas station, in their front lawn?" Right? Back in the 1920s, when this case was decided, cars were simply not as prevalent as they are today. And if you lived in a somewhat not urban area, you would run out of gas very easily because there weren't gas stations around. And if you run out of gas in this little Model T or whatever, you're probably screwed. So the case probably made more sense back then than it does today. So by the way, I ran the math in case you're interested. The price of gas in 1925 was 23 cents a gallon. Whoa! Well, for inflation, that's about $3. So it's actually more or less, ballpark same price. Here's a graph depicting the price of gas adjusted for inflation. So it's been more or less the same for 90 years. Robert, give me the facts here, please.
I'm not ready for this.
Okay, Kaylee, give me the facts, please.
I don't believe it was assigned.
It wasn't assigned.
Did I not assign this case?
You put the wrong number. You put the case name, but then you put like 903 to 903.
Yeah, we could just.
So it's kind
So,
of.
did some of you read it?
I read it.
Well, okay. In the future, you should probably understand it's a Scrivener's error, and I meant to use on a case. Isaac, give me the case, please.
All right. So the McLeans want to create a gas station, and there is a covenant that is preventing that because, the entire subdivision was part of, banks from the original owner,
Good.
and, they were not allowed to.
Okay, good. So I'll briefly summarize the case for most of you who didn't read it. Again, if I give a case name and wrong page numbers, you should probably at least ask me or read the case that's next in the line, not just assume it's not assigned. It was my mistake, but I won't be mad at you. This was a case where someone tried building a gas station in the 1920s in a residential area. And if you look around the block, right, everything is residential. But in his chain of title, Isaac, was there any indication that he couldn't do this here?
I don't believe there was, but it should have been on notice because
Yeah,
of the.
right. So this is one of those cases about constructive notice, right? Even though his title did not have the covenant present, the adjoining properties nearby did. And even if he didn't go and investigate the records of these other pieces of property, he should have been on what's called constructive notice. Constructive notice, right? That basically, if everyone else is residential, so is mine. This is like another case we did, Juliet versus Drywall. Remember this case? Where someone wanted to build an apartment in an area with all residential housing. And the court basically said, you should be on notice that you can't do this. So even though your property is not bound, and when you bought it, you may not have been aware of this, if you did a quick look around the neighborhood, you should know it. And again, this is the same rule. If you should be on notice not to do something, and you do it anyway, the courts are going to rule against you, right? Courts don't like people who play dumb. Like, well, I didn't know. It wasn't in my chain of title. Look around, dummy, right? If you look around the block, you'll see what's going on. And courts do not like to rule in this fashion, where you had notice or you should have had notice. Okay? Yes, Yusuf?
What if everyone around you wasn't doing the certain thing just because they weren't doing it and not because
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just a coincidence, right? This is Yusuf's question. I think it's a fair question. What if it's just a coincidence that no one in the block built a gas station because they like having a quiet neighborhood, right? You're taking a risk. So I think what constructive notice actually means is if you notice that everyone else is doing something in a certain way, you should investigate why. And is there anything stopping you from seeing who owns your neighbor's property and check their title? No. Especially if you're in a subdivision. And the very nature of a subdivision is the land was chopped up with these covenants attached to it. So this is the court saying, even if you didn't know, you should have done some homework. And the fact that you didn't do your homework means you're out of luck. Make sense? Yes, Chester?
So that goes back to like inquiry.
Yeah, exactly, right? Something was off that should have put you on guard to go do your homework, right? Again, judges don't let people play dumb. It's like, well, no one told me, not my chain of title. Research, right? That's where the future comes up. Jesse?
Does the concept of constructive notice differ before and after using caveat emptor?
Well, caveat emptor refers to defects in the property, like a leaky roof or ghosts, I guess, right? Caveat emptor doesn't really apply to a chain of title because that can be investigated with certainty. It's not like a cracked foundation that may only appear years later or a leaky roof that appears in a storm. So caveat emptor doesn't really have application in this area. Questions on this one, in case which maybe a couple of you read. The syllabus we fixed, they already started sending letters at the 9th edition of the book. Apparently they added a new chapter. Right, so the book's even longer. And they cut some old cases, which I don't know which one they cut. So it's always a mystery. I don't know until the book shows up, and invariably cases I like are gone and cases I dislike are added. Okay? Any questions? All right, let's go to the last case. I hope you read. Did I give the right page number for Neponsit? Okay, very good. All right, Rob, I'll go back to you. Give me the facts, please, in Neponsit.
I
Oh, you didn't read that one either. Okay. Haley, did you read Neponsit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Neponsit was a realty company. They actually owned the defendant's tract of land.
Okay.
However, it was given to Robert Dyer, and then the defendant purchased it at a deed of sale. So apparently the property was bound by a covenant, and it even stated it in the deed which the defendant was given at the.
Okay, very good, thank you. So this case arose from an area of Long Island in New York called Neponsit, which borders on Jamaica Bay in the Atlantic. Now, this place actually got destroyed during Hurricane Sandy, because if you look where it is, it's this outcrop from Long Island, where it's hit both by Jamaica Bay, which is over here in the Atlantic. So it got, it's almost geographically similar to Galveston. It's like this outcrop of the water, which I destroyed a couple of years ago. Fun fact, Long Island is not actually an island. It's not. It's connected to Brooklyn, right? Maybe a peninsula, but it's not an island. It's a misnomer. Things you learn. I am from, I can show it. I am from here, Staten Island, which is indeed actually an island covered by water on all sides. In fact, I had a teacher in college who once said, the Statue of Liberty is on Staten Island. I'm like, no, it's on Liberty Island, and Ellis Island is there, but this is ultimately that's where I'm from. So here we have a situation where there's a piece of land and there's a covenant on it. Now, I usually said a covenant is saying you can't do X, right? You can't build a factory, you can't do this. But Kaylee, what did this covenant actually require? Something different. A payment up to whom? Who got this money?
It was kind of like the homeowners association.
Exactly, right? So this was a new thing, right? This wasn't a covenant saying that you can't build a factory, you can't build a, an apartment complex, whatever. It was an obligation to pay money. And not just pay money to a person, right? The owner of Blackacre. The money was to be paid to a homeowners association of sorts, right? A homeowners association. In fact, the name of the case was the Neponsit Properties Owner Association versus the bank. So what was going on here is that the bank refused to pay this $4 fee. And the homeowners association sued the bank which owned this property. That was the basis of the case. Now, if you read the notes after the case, you may have been a little intrigued by this. Why would the bank refuse to pay $4? I mean, this is a pretty trivial fee. At the time, the legality of these homeowners association was not clear. In fact, a lot of people suspected the courts would not uphold this sort of relationship because it was novel, right? It was novel in at least two respects. First, it was a covenant to pay money. That had never been done before. Covenants were always, you can't do this, you can't build a factory, you can't do this, right? Second, the dominant estate that got the benefit, right, was usually a person who owned a piece of land. Here, the benefit was not to a person owning a piece of land, but to a general a corporation, a homeowners association. So this case was novel in several respects. And the editors of the book wrote, and it makes sense to me at least, that this was a test case. Right? You know what a test case is? Bradley, was a test case?
Yeah, for me.
Yeah, Matt, you were nodding.
That's one of those that, like, you're waiting for it to come because you want to see, like...
Were the bank and the property association really adverse here? No. The editors wrote, and I think they're probably right, that the bank wanted a decision upholding this practice. In fact, they wrote that the bank filed a weak brief. What does that mean? They didn't really litigate it fully. They wanted to lose, right? But they wanted a judge, and this is by the New York Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York. They wanted a judge with the New York Court of Appeals to rule that these associations were valid, and if it was valid here, it'd be valid throughout the state. So the court here was confronted with, by its own admission, first impression, right? This is first impression. They've never dealt with something like this before. Doesn't really stop them, though, from ruling as they did. So Christine, what does the court do here first about the question of, is this a valid covenant? Does this meet the requirements of a covenant that can bind successors?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because-
Why is it a valid covenant? Tell me.
Because it's benefiting the property owner.
Oh, okay. But Christine, what are the three requirements that traditionally have been associated with the enforcement of covenant? There are three that they identify.
So there's the intent to bind.
Okay, good. So the grantors and the grantee must intend that the covenant runs with the land. Good.
Touch and concern the land.
Okay.
And burden owner on notice.
Okay, good. So there are three requirements for a covenant to be enforced. First, the intent of the parties, right? Did the grantor and the grantee intend that the covenant should run with the land? And when I say run with the land, I mean burden successors. That's what I mean by that. The third requirement is there privity of estate, right? Is there privity of estate, right? They mean horizontal and vertical privity there, right? Yeah. I skipped it deliberately. I deliberately skipped it. You didn't miss out. I know what I'm doing. The first one is intent. The third one is there privity of estate. Those are horizontal and vertical privity, right? Neither of these are problems here, right? In this situation, the homeowners association intended the covenant to be run with the land. There's horizontal and vertical privity. There's you had a single plot of land with a subdivision, and covenants were placed in each plot. The second one, I promise, Chester, I'm coming back. The second one is where the dispute arose. And there's this requirement that the covenant touch and concern the land. And if you notice, this was used in the Tulk versus Moxhay case. I deliberately didn't mention it because it doesn't really explain it at all in that case. David, help us out here. What does this phrase, touch and concern the land, mean? What I mean, touch and concern, I don't know what, I mean, those words don't really have any meaning. I don't know what that means. What do we do with this phrase?
Like, doesn't it like somehow benefit?
Okay. Benefit whom? Generally with a covenant, how do we break up the benefits and the burdens? How does it usually work?
Well, usually with covenant, it says like, if they give a covenant, it's like, you can't do something.
Right, I can't build a factory, right? Who's benefit from that?
And I benefit.
So one party. How is this case different? Is this one party burden, one party benefits?
It's for a lot of.
How is that $4 being spent? Where's that money going?
It is,
Where's that money headed?
for like the pub.
Where's that $4 being spent?
For like the common?
Yeah, the common areas, exactly, right? Exactly, thank you, David. So usually with a covenant, one party is benefiting and one party is being burdened. But here, the money that's being extracted, this $4 for whatever number of acres, is being put into a common fund to take care of, I'll show you this other map I have, common areas, parks, roads, whatever else. This doesn't fit, right, within the usual requirements of what it means to touch and concern the land. So the court basically says as well, let's make up a new standard. Let's make up a new standard, right? Does the covenant substantially alter rights? Okay? Does this covenant alter the rights of the parties? Yes. That's a new test, right? Does the covenant alter the rights of the parties? That's what touch concerns means, right? If the covenant alters the rights of the parties, it touches and concerns the land. Now, Nicole, will a covenant ever not affect the rights of the parties? Is there any circumstance where this test will not be met? Let me ask you a question. Is there any circumstance where this test will not be met?
In regards to homeowners?
Yeah.
Well, typically, they don't find privity between.
I'm not talking about privity, I'm talking about touch and concern, right? The court defines touch and concern to mean, does it affect the rights of the parties? Will that test always be met?
Why?
Because it's either typically constructed
Yeah. They basically created a test that we satisfied 100% of the time, right? This test will be satisfied 99.9% of the time, right? I don't know, maybe you can think of an example where a covenant burdens a party, but it doesn't affect their rights. I don't know, maybe it was like a 1 penny fee. Maybe it's like such a small amount because the word substantial's in there, but they basically made a test that in almost every case, a court can uphold it as touching and concerning the land. Yusuf.
That's what I was just gonna say, that it's substantially affects. Does that make
So
sense?
$4, and inflation is what it is, but $4 fee, that seems like a pretty small amount even back then. If $4 is substantial, yeah, right. So I think Yusuf is right? I haven't done the inflation for $4, so I'm guessing it's a pretty small amount, right? If gas was, I think, 20 cents, and that's basically times 10, so maybe it's like $40 a year. If a fee of $40 a year substantially alters your rights, then, and it's not just your rights, it's also the rights of people buying it. There's that as well. Bradley?
In note 1, it says it's $340 plus interest.
$340 plus interest, right? What was the value of the property? Does it say?
I don't think so.
I'm guessing it was a fairly small percentage of what the fee was. I mean, how much are homeowners' fees today? Like 2 or 3%? Whatever they are, it's a small percentage. In other words, there might be circumstances where the fee is so nominal that a court will say it's not substantial. I mean, maybe it is, but my humble prediction is this case gave the green light to homeowners' fees, right? This is what blessed homeowner association fees, and I don't think there's much litigation after that. So that's a test. What does touch and concern mean? It doesn't have to be on your land or a neighbor's land. It's in general, does it substantially affect the rights of the parties? And Yusuf is right to look at the word substantial, but I don't think it does much work here. I think it's one of those words judges put in there to make it look like it's not an open-ended test, but it's an open-ended test. So we get the first part of that holding. The second part is a little bit different, right? Can a corporation, a homeowner association, be in privity? Antonella, what does the court say here? This is the second part of the holding.
Well, so they were saying that, they ended up saying that they were in privity, but they went through different ways to get there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Explain to us, please.
So they were saying that technically they wouldn't be in privity because the test is, if like they can enforce the covenant, they have to be like a privy estate for the covenant.
And who generally is involved in privy estate? What kind of entity?
It has to be the claimant.
A person, human being, flesh and blood, right? What do we have here?
We have like an association.
Corporation.
It's not like one person that can enforce it.
Very good. So, Fowler, Pat was blocking it. What does the court say about this rule, this old rule that the person in privity must be a human being, flesh and blood?
Well, I mean, they ultimately rule that they're recognizing that homeowner association benefits all of the homeowners
So
that
what-
they're representing privity.
Right. So what they basically say is, even though this is a corporation representing an association, it's actually people, right? That this organization represents all the people together. It is basically flesh and blood. And as a result, this party, this third party entity, can accept the fees and use it for the public good. So in those two moves, the court greenlighted, blessed the idea of a homeowners association, right? It first said touch concern means anything that substantially alters rights, which is basically anything. And second, it said that the money can be deposited in this third party, and this third party can then decide how the money is spent and how the benefits are allocated. Why? Because the third party represents the people of that community, right? So this was a very significant case for the time because it approved this notion of a homeowners association. And the reason why this case was so important is in the 1920s, zoning law didn't really exist as it does today. In order to have land use, you couldn't rely on the government. To restrict use of land, you used covenants. It was a private enforcement mechanism.
That would change over the next 30, 40 years, where now cities, not Houston, but cities would have zoning saying that you can't have industrial use here, you can't have multifamily here. But at the time, to keep communities looking a certain way required covenants. And it became impractical for a single party to have covenants here, there, everywhere. So they created these associations to manage these covenants. And what happens if one neighbor on this block broke the covenant? You didn't have to wait for a person to sue, the organization would sue, right? It's a lot easier to have an organization sue your neighbor than to sue your own neighbor, right? That's not very pleasant. So you basically shift it, and you have homeowner association meetings and boards and all this other stuff to keep things looking a certain way. But this decision in the Neponsit case was very significant because it blessed that new practice, which hadn't really been legally sound. And the court did it in a fairly transparent way. It said, well, we have these old rules, they're ancient, they don't really fit our society today, so we're going to roll them. We're going to ignore those old rules and move on. And that's what we have today. So questions on Neponsit? Questions on Neponsit? Let me sum up a bit. The most important thing for you to learn from class today is this picture. Tattoo it on your retina, right? Just look at it over and over again because it will help this topic make much more sense. Putting aside this requirement of touch and concern, which under the modern approach means whatever you want, the important requirement is privity. Okay? In order for burdens to run, you need horizontal privity, you need privity of a state. Right? For the burden to run, you need the privity of the state. For benefits to run, you do not need privity of the state. You only need vertical privity. Okay? For equitable servitudes, generally the remedy is injunction, not damages. For covenants, you can seek damages. And even if a covenant is not in your chain of title, look around, and you'll see what you're supposed to build. Other questions? Yusuf?
So there's no classes coming Tuesday?
No classes Tuesday, but there's on Sunday. Thank you. Anything else? I will see you soon on Sunday, hopefully, more than Lindsay. Thank you.